Hi everyone, welcome back to the Movie Reviewers 100. My name is Scott, also known as Cineram here on this website called YouTube. I do reviews on Thursday here on the channel, and I'm closing out this week's theme of Susan Sarandon with Cloud Atlas, which I just saw last night at the Chicago International Film Festival. Now this may not be the most appropriate film to talk about for Susan Sarandon Week, because her role in this is relatively small. However, I thought it would be, a good way to maybe get more views, more new subscribers and what have you, by talking about a movie that's brand new, really brand new, hasn't even officially come out yet. Cloud Atlas is based on this novel right here, which says Cloud Atlas. It's by David Mitchell. And this was read by the Wachowskis and by their co-director, Tom Tykwer. Now, one thing I learned at the screening last night is that the director of Lola Run and Perfume, A Story of a Murderer, his name is not pronounced Tykwer or Tykwer or Tykwer, but Tykwer. Tykwer is how you pronounce his last name. So the three of them, they've been friends for a while. The story goes that they tell at the screening is that they all sort of met around the time that their movies came out in 1999. The Wachowskis had released The Matrix, and of course Tykwer had released Lola Run, and they sort of, hit it off and became close friends. And they talked about the fact that so many times they wanted to meet and hang out and couldn't because their schedules conflicted, and so jokingly they said, well, you know what we should do? We should just all three of us make a movie together. That way we could always hang out all the time. So that's what they did. While they were making For Vendetta, the Wachowskis came across the novel, Cloud Atlas. I forget who it was. I guess maybe Natalie Portman was reading it. I don't know exactly. But they picked it up, really liked it a lot, passed it along to Tykwer, and he liked it a lot. So they wrote the script and then brought it to David Mitchell, the book's author, and said, here, what do you think? This is the kind of movie we want to make out of your book. And he said, yeah, let's go. That sounds good to me. So I wanted to actually do two separate videos, one on them and then making the whole process behind it as they were, talking about it at the screening last night, and one that's an actual review of the movie. But unfortunately, I was not allowed to videotape them during the screening, so I'll just have to recount what I remember. First of all, the story behind Cloud Atlas is one that I didn't explore very fully before I saw the film. I knew the concept behind it, and I knew, of course, a lot of the actors, but as far as the actual plots go, that I wasn't familiar with. This movie basically is 6 films in one. It's 6 separate stories, some of which are related to each other very closely, or I should say more closely than others. The span of the events take place over a long period of time. I believe the first storyline, chronologically, is in the 1800s, the late 1800s. The main character is a lawyer named Adam Ewing, who's played by Jim Sturgess, who you'll probably remember from Across the Universe and a couple other films. Then you've got, in the next storyline, which takes place in the early 1900s, Robert Frobisher, who is a composer. He is a young guy played by Ben Whishaw, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, or maybe Whishaw, but he was the main character in Tom Tykwer's film, Perfume, The Story of a Murderer. In the storyline that takes place in the 1970s, the main character is Louisa Ray. She is a journalist, and she's played by Halle Berry. The present-day storyline, the one that takes place in 2012, the main character is Timothy Cavendish, who is an older gentleman. He's a book publisher. He's played by Jim Broadbent. Then in the storyline that takes place in the future, the year 2144, if I remember correctly, is played by a Korean actress named Doona Bae, and she plays what they call a fabricant, or an artificially created person, whose codename is Sonmi451. That's SONMI-451, Somni451. And she basically works as an indentured servant basically serves drinks and food in a cafe in the futuristic city of New Seoul. or maybe it's Neo-Soul, I forget exactly. And the final storyline takes place in the distant future. There's never really a year assigned to it, because apparently calendars don't exist at that point, but it's called 40 Winters After the Fall, something like that. But it takes place in a largely technologically free civilization, an island, where this tribe of people live. The main character's name is Zachary, and he's, of course, played by Tom Hanks. Now, one thing that the Wachowskis were keen on, in drawing as many parallels between the 6 storylines as possible, was in casting the same actors in all the storylines. So, of course, Tom Hanks gets, the top billing. He's the first name mentioned in the credits. But he doesn't just play Zachary. He also has major and minor parts in each of the other stories as well. Halle Berry also, in addition to playing the journalist, will have brief little appearances in some of the other stories, and play major supporting parts in even more. Then you've got Jim Broadbent, who plays at least 2 major characters aside from the book publisher. And then you've got Jim Sturgess, who plays a couple other characters. He plays actually a Korean guy in one segment, and another segment he has a brief cameo as a football hooligan. And then you've got Doona, who, in addition to playing the fabricant, also plays a woman in the early 1800s, I think. Or maybe it's the 1800s, actually, I think. She plays Jim Sturgess' wife. So it's a very, very complicated setup here, where you have only these very tenuous connections between the storylines. For example, Jim Sturgess, the lawyer, is writing a journal. And in Ben Wishaw's storyline, he is the composer. He's actually reading that same journal. And additionally, Ben, his character, Robert Frobisher, while he's composing, is also writing letters to the man he's in love with. And those letters are discovered by Halle Berry, who reads them. There isn't a really solid connection that I could spot between the 1970s storyline and the 2012 storyline. But between the 2 futuristic storylines, you've got, of course, the fabricant Somni 451, who's the main character in that. And in the far-flung future storyline, she is actually worshipped as a deity figure by the inhabitants of the island tribe. So there's connections between all these. But each one pretty much is basically its own story. And the one that seems a little bit out of place to me, in comparison with the others, is the one about the book publisher who is tricked by his brother into signing himself into a retirement home where he's kept under lock and key and isn't given any freedoms or anything like that. So with some of the other residents of the home, they plan an escape, basically, to steal the keys and make their escape from the people who are holding them captive, in a way. Now, in addition to these characters, you've also got a couple other actors that play principally supporting parts. Hugo Weaving, of course, who played Agent Smith and V in the previous Wachowski films, and Keith David. Actually, I think that should be David Keith, shouldn't it? I can't remember. And Susan Sarandon, of course, plays a couple of small parts, and Hugh Grant also plays a few small parts, but none of those people are actually the main characters of any particular storyline. They just have, sort of smaller parts. Some larger supporting parts, some just very, very brief, just like all the other actors. And I think that one of the reasons why they cast basically the same people in all these storylines is for economic reasons. They would have had to hire 5 times as many actors to fill all these parts, so instead they just cast the same actors in all these different parts to sort of save money, because they're not making 6 different movies. Technically, they're only making 1 movie, so they only had to pay them 1 time. No matter how many different makeup appliances they had to put on. Believe me, there's a lot of prosthetic makeup in this movie. Yeah, some of them... Halle Berry has a brief appearance in one of the storylines, and you'd never recognize her. She's buried under a ton of prosthetics. You would never recognize her in a million years. One of the male actors... Actually, 2 of the male actors play female characters at one point, which I thought was pretty cool. Occasionally this can sort of call attention to itself in a negative way, because you end up just finding it funny. Oh, look at Susan Sarandon's nose. She's got a prosthetic nose or whatever. So that could be a little distracting. I would have preferred if they'd cast different people in on all the various parts, but I understand they had a lot of trouble getting money for the movie as it was, and if they had marketable people like Tom Hanks and Hugh Grant and what have you in your film, you best use them as much as possible. I don't necessarily have a favorite storyline of all these. But I have to say that for the most part it works really well as one big story rather than 6 separate ones, for the most part. Some of them work better than others. I think probably the best performance in the entire film is from Ben Whishaw, who played the composer. He's working with Jim Broadbent in a lot of his scenes, and I just thought his performance was very, very good. Jim Sturgess, of course, is one of the major character, but he's actually sick for most of his screen time. Seems to kind of lying there being abused by people. His storyline is he's traveling on a ship, and he's being treated by a doctor, but he also discovers that there's a stowaway who's a freed slave, and he's got the choice whether to tell the captain of the ship about the slave or the stowaway, or to hide him and help feed him and keep him hidden. The journalist is trying to expose unsafe conditions in a nuclear power plant. As I said, the publisher is trying to escape from his old folks' home. The fabricant, Sumni 451, she is dealing with a lot of confusing issues involving her own existence. And when Jim Sturgess pops up as a Korean guy, he helps sort of teach her about the world, about her existence, and what her possible purpose is in life. Unfortunately, Jim Sturgess and some of the other people who are in makeup really don't look convincing as Koreans or East Asian people. It kind of reminds me of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer makeup, when vampires basically their foreheads change and their eyebrows lower. That's basically what it looks like. All they're just missing is the fangs. And in the far-flung future storyline, Tom Hanks is asked by another character played by Halle Berry to help her reach a disused satellite station on his island and send a message out. That particular storyline has a lot of language that was difficult to understand. The dialogue was written in a way that is like an extension of the English language. It's just like umpteen different variations on slang and common use expressions, so it's very, very hard to understand specifically what they're saying. But the acting was good enough, so I still kind of understood what everybody meant, even though I didn't actually understand what they were saying, if you get my meaning. So points to the cast for that. A lot of the special effects in this movie are really great. Like I said, I could have used less prosthetic makeup because I thought it was distracting. It looked a little silly at times, but all the big effects work digitally was pretty amazing. What else? The favorite actor of the Wachowskis is, of course, Hugo Weaving. He plays, obviously, none of the main characters. He just plays supporting parts. But practically every single character he plays is a bad guy. And the same with Hugh Grant as well. He's definitely not the friendliest sort. He plays maybe one likable character, but all the rest of them are unlikable characters. One question that I wanted to ask them, and actually got asked by someone else at the screening, was when the directors were reading the novel, did they had this idea basically to use all these actors in different parts. And what I was wondering is, was there anything in the book that sort of led them to conclude that these characters could all be grouped under one person? And they said they sort of drew connections basically that they sort of saw in the characters and in the stories, rather than it was anything specific that was written in there. And that kind of makes sense because a lot of the times, like for example, Halle Berry, she plays major parts in at least 2 of the storylines. But in 2 others, she's basically just an extra. You know, she's just someone who appears there in the scene, you know, and you know, you get like one glimpse of her and that's it. You recognize her, at least in one of them, but she really doesn't have anything to do. So obviously they didn't find a really great character for her to play in that particular storyline. What else? They were talking a little bit about, you know, what it's like to try and fund a film like this. And to have to basically put their own money in order to make it work, because although it was released by Warner Brothers, they had to, you know, find a lot of different investors all over the world. Despite the fact that they had a really great cast, you know, of people that everyone liked, they still, you know, they tried to explain the concept to people and they just wouldn't get it, you know, and so it was a real question mark. Somebody compared it to The Fountain, actually, and I think a more apt comparison is probably The Hours, which is a movie that was nominated for Best Picture in 2003, and Nicole Kidman won Best Actress for playing Virginia Woolf, the writer, with the prosthetic nose. Again, coincidence there. But you've got 3 storylines there that are tenuously related to their to the character's interest in the novel Mrs. Dalloway, which was written, of course, by, is it Virginia Woolf? I can't remember exactly. I think maybe Virginia Woolf's a fictional character. I forget exactly. I'm an idiot if I think that that's actually the case, or you know, whatever. But yeah, you've got Julianne Moore and you've got Meryl Streep. They're each of the main characters in their storylines, and then you've got Nicole Kidman. She's the main character of her storyline, but it's all related in some way to Mrs. Dalloway because the other 2 characters have read the book. You know what I mean? Anyway, so there's like this little birthmark that each character has, or at least several of the characters have in each storyline that's in the shape of a comet. You know, so those things link everything together, and obviously you've got the these little connections between some of the. Actually, there's actually one character that appears in 2 different storylines. The guy who Robert Frobisher is in love with, he is a scientist. And of course, he's a young guy in that storyline, but he appears later on in Halle Berry's storyline as an older gentleman who's working at the nuclear power plant, which is one of the reasons why she has a relationship with him. Not a relationship, but, you know, I mean, she gets involved with what's going on with him with a nuclear power plant because she meets him. What else? Well, there's a lot to think about in this movie. I am going to see it at least one more time, and I'm going to read the book, of course, or at least I'm going to try to. I sat with a couple people in the screening, one of them who had read the book, and she had read it like 6 years ago, and she really didn't remember a lot about it. She left as soon as the movie was over, probably because she was so tired. One thing I ought to mention, unlike the book, which is basically has sort of clear-cut beginnings and endings for each storyline, the movie is a giant mix of all 6 storylines. They all start together, and although there are several scenes devoted to each storyline at a time, there's never a point where you have one storyline start and then it ends and then you pick up the next one. They all sort of go along together throughout the entire picture, so it's like, you know, there are points where it becomes almost like a montage, where you're cutting back and forth between the various storylines. I should mention Susan Sarandon, because this is supposed to be her theme week. She basically plays an old a girlfriend of Jim Broadbent in his storyline, and she plays sort of a Earth Mother type in Tom Hanks' storyline, and she is the wife of Hugh Grant, I believe Hugh Grant, in Jim Sturgess' storyline. But yeah, her appearances are pretty minimal. So again, it's not the best example of a Susan Sarandon film. You know, she's there in the movie. She's prominently featured, but she's not one of the major characters. I'd say of the people that I mentioned, her screen time is the shortest, except for maybe Keith David. His roles are kind of small. He's only like in 4 of the segments, and they're all supporting parts. So there's my review. Hope you enjoyed it. In case you couldn't tell, I would recommend seeing the movie if you're feeling adventurous. It's kind of long, 2.5 hours, but it moves really well, and it's always interesting. Even when parts of it don't seem to work as well as others, it's always interesting. So yeah, I would say check it out. Please do, because I know that a film like this is very unusual, could use the support of people. Probably not going to have big box office like, say, Taken 2. But you never know. It could be like extraordinary and be nominated for Best Picture and everyone loves it. I really don't know. We'll see about that. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it. We're going to have another theme starting tomorrow on Friday. So please tune in for that. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks very much for watching, and take it easy, everybody.